So, a lot happened this most recent Rocket League DreamHack, and I'm gonna sum it all up in 15 minutes or less, or at least I'll try. Starting from the bottom, we got Nameless, who's also gameless, because none of their matches were streamed, so I couldn't even tell you if they scored a goal. They lost 3-0 to NRG and Paradox. Cultivate wasn't Cultivate, as they suffered the same Cultivate as Nameless. No stream matches, and they suffered two 3-0s to Reciprocity and Afterthought. Controller Esports also had no streamed matches, and they lost 3-0 to Vitality and Ground Zero. Monkey Business had no business being here, as they got swept by Cloud9 and RBG, with no streamed matches. Dark Allegiance couldn't get any allegiance with any of the teams they faced, getting swept by both G2 and Barcelona. Without stream matches, of course. I can't tell you how bad 303 Esports was because they had no stream matches, but I can tell you they were swept by Dignitas and Linked Up. The dudes got swept by Rogue, but then they actually took a game off of Bullsend. Unfortunately, neither of the matches were streamed. 1NE may have gotten swept by Mousesports and TSM, but both of their matches were streamed, so that's a plus. Bullsend started off getting swept by Complexity, but then they won 3-1 against the dudes. The last game of the tournament was a 3-1 loss to Lotus, and then they were bull sent home. Linked Up started the tournament off by losing 3-1 to the Peeps, but they turned it around and won 3-0 to 303. Unfortunately, they were sent home after getting swept by Space Station. Ground Zero didn't start out well, getting 3-0'd by Space Station. Fortunately, they bounced back with a sweep over Controller Esports, but were only able to take one game off the Peeps. RBG started out really promising, winning the first two games against Ghosts, but they were reverse swept. They looked like they were bouncing back when they swept Monkey Business, but the very next match they could only win one game against Plot Twist. Paradox started out terribly, getting swept by the Chiefs. They were able to sweep the number 32 seed Nameless, which isn't very impressive. Their reward for winning that game? An absolute shellacking by Mousesports. Aftershock is the first team that was expected to go into Day 2, that was eliminated in Day 1 as the 16th seed. In the first match, when they played against Lotus, they could only score one goal in a 3-0 loss. They swept Cultivate Gaming, but then they lost 3-1 to Complexity, eliminating them from the tournament. The Chiefs were another surprise Day 1 elimination as the 15th seed. They won their first match handedly, sweeping Paradox. After that, they had to face NRG, and they couldn't win a game in that match. The final match of the tournament for them was a hard-fought 3-1 loss with 2 overtimes to TSM, making them the only team in Day 1 to win their first game and lose their next 2. The real surprise elimination in Day 1 was Barcelona. After losing Alpha during the off-season, they didn't look too bad at the start, almost reverse sweeping a Plot Twist, but they lost the final game of that series. After that, they swept Dark Allegiance, but then lost a close match to Ghost, 3-1, losing 2 of the 3 overtimes in that series. Alright, time to segue into Day 2. Half the teams are gone, and today we are getting rid of 8 more. Let's see who it is. Ghost Gaming was almost able to get into Day 2 without losing a single match. They reverse swept RBG, and then took Cloud9 into a Game 5 overtime that lasted over 4 minutes. They qualified for Day 2 in a 3-1 upset win over Barcelona. The second day started with a rocky start, losing the first 2 games to Vitality. They won the third game, but lost the fourth, putting them against the Peeps. They lost in Game 5, sending them to the bleachers for the rest of the weekend. Space Station had a good start on Day 1, sweeping Ground Zero. That quickly turned around though, as they were swept by Vitality their next match. They turned it around again when they swept Linked Up, getting into Day 2. Their first match on Day 2 was against Cloud9. They won the first game, but lost 3 straight afterward, sending them to face Plot Twist. In that match, they could only win 1 game and were eliminated from the tournament. Complexity started out strong on Day 1, sweeping Bullsend. Their next match, unfortunately, they lost 3-1 to Rogue. It looked like they were going to lose again when they dropped the first game against Afterthought, but they won the next 3, securing their spot on Day 2. Day 2 was very unfortunate for this team. They were first swept by GC Aura, and then they lost in Game 5 to Reciprocity, when every single match in that series went to overtime. Rogue is the first team that was expected to be in Day 3 to be eliminated. Their Day 1 was close to perfect, as they swept the Dudes and only lost one game to Complexity. Their first match in Day 2 was against Mouse Sports, who they took to Game 5 but unfortunately lost. The last match they played was against Lotus, where they were beat 1-3 in an upset loss. Plot twist, coming into the tournament as the 22 seed, was one of the best Cinderella stories in this tournament. They beat Barcelona in Game 5, and then they were swept by G2. They got into the next day in a 3-1 victory over RBG. The second day, they sadly lost in Game 5 to Dignitas, but turned it around and beat Space Station in 4 games. After that win, they were put against Energy and lost 3-0. Lotus was a surprise this tournament. They were the first South American team to win a match at a LAN when they beat Afterthought 3-0. Right after that, they were swept by Reciprocity, forcing them to play Bullsend, who they beat 3-1. On Day 2, they had to play NRG in their first match, and they were swept. They were able to beat Rogue in an upset win 3-1, but were eliminated by Dignitas in 4 games. TSM is known for normally choking Day 1 at DreamHack, and it looked like it was going to happen again when they lost in Game 5 to GC Aura. They were able to sweep 1NE, and then they beat the Chiefs in 4 games. Second day, they started out strong when they beat the 2 seed Reciprocity 3-1. But then they had deja vu, losing to GC Aura again in 5 games, with a 10-minute overtime loss in Game 5. They were eliminated from the tournament when they could only win 1 game to the Peeps. Reciprocity was the 2 seed at the beginning of the tournament. They showed they deserved it early when they won both their Day 1 matches to Cultivate and Lotus without losing a single game. Their first game in Day 2 was a wake-up call when they lost 3-1 to TSM, and they suffered a big scare when they went to Game 5 against Complexity, especially when all 5 games went to overtime. Their final gasp was a Game 5 loss to Vitality, eliminating one of the favorites to win. We're in Day 3 now, and we can't tell who will win. Actually, we can, because the tournament already happened. GC Aura Esports was the ultimate Cinderella story of this DreamHack. They first beat TSM in a Game 5. Then they showed they were serious when they reverse swept Mouse Sports, making it to Day 2. The second day started off with a bang. They swept Complexity, only letting them score 2 goals. Then they beat TSM again in another Game 5, being one of 3 teams to not have dropped a match heading into Day 3. Their reward? Playing against the number 1 seed NRG, and getting swept in the process. Mouse Sports started out great when they swept 1NE, and then won the first 2 games to GC Aura. But they lost that match, making them play Paradox. They did sweep that team though, taking Mouse Sports into Day 2. Day 2 started great when they beat Rogue in 5 games. It only got better when they were able to sweep the 1 seed NRG to make it into the final day. The final day took an unfortunate turn when they lost the first 2 games to the Peeps. It looked like they were going to reverse sweep them, but Mouse Sports lost in a close Game 5. Dignitas looked great in the opening day. They swept 303 Esports and then denied the reverse sweep, beating the Peeps in Game 5, securing their spot in Day 2. Day 2 started with a scare, but they took Plot Twist to Game 5 and won. Their next match was them getting swept by Cloud9, but every game went into overtime, including a 9-minute one. They were then able to beat Lotus 3-1, getting into Day 3. The first match in Day 3 was against G2, which they lost 1-3. Cloud9 was one of the 3 teams that didn't lose a match going into Day 3, as they only lost 3 total games in the first 2 days. Their first match was a sweep over Monkey Business, and then they won a Game 5 overtime to Ghost. Day 2 started with a 3-1 victory over Space Station, and ended with a sweep against Dignitas, with over 14 minutes of overtime in that match alone. Their Day 3 start wasn't great, losing the first 2 games to Vitality. They were able to force it to Game 5, but they lost the final game in overtime. Renault Vitality had a near-perfect Day 1, not losing a single game against either Controller Esports or Space Station. Their Day 2 also started out smoothly as they beat Ghost 3-1, but it took a turn for a worse when they got swept by G2, making them face Reciprocity. They were barely able to win that match with it going to Game 5, but they won it and made it to Day 3. Day 3 started amazingly, winning the first 2 games against Cloud9, and they were able to fend off Cloud9, winning in Game 5. In the semifinals, they had to face the Peeps. They traded games, making it 2-2, But then Vitality lost the next two, and they were eliminated. Energy came into the tournament as the favorite to win it all, and they showed everyone that it could easily happen when they didn't lose a game to Nameless or the Chiefs on the first day. The next day started with more of the same when they swept Lotus, but then they got a taste of their own medicine when they were swept by Mouse Sports. They continued the sweep or B-sweep streak when they swept Plot Twist to get into day 3. Their first match on day 3 was against GC Aura, who they swept. The semifinal against G2 looked good in the beginning when they had 3 chances to close the match, but then choked the 3-1 lead and lost in a Game 7 overtime. It's time for the finals! Let's see which teams got here and how. The Peeps, who were the 12th seed, played all of the matches possible and refused to either sweep or get swept by any team. Their day 1 started with a 3-1 win over Linked Up. They were almost able to reverse sweep Dignitas, but they lost by 1 in Game 5. That match forced them to play against Ground Zero, and they won 3-1 to get into day 2. Day 2 started off badly, losing the first 2 games to G2. They almost pulled the reverse sweep, but they lost in Game 5. Now at the bottom of the barrel, they had to step up, and they did. They beat Ghost in Game 5, and then beat TSM in 4 games. Day 3 for the Peeps started out great when they won the first 2 games against Mouse Sports, but they lost the next 2 and barely won in Game 5. The semifinals against Vitality started out really close with the Peeps winning 1 of the first 3 games, but they won 3 in a row, setting them to the finals, which is a rematch against G2. G2, who was the 5th seed, dominated the entire tournament. They only lost 2 games in the entire first 2 days, both of them being to the Peeps. They started out sweeping Dark Allegiance and then only letting Plot Twist score 3 goals in a 3-0 victory. Their first game on day 2 was against the Peeps, and they started just like normal, winning the first 2 games. They were almost shocked by the Peeps when that team won the next 2 games, but G2 closed it out in Game 5. After that, they immediately turned around and smacked Vitality 3-0, getting them into day 3. Day 3 started with a 3-1 win over Dignitas, and then they faced Energy in the semifinals. G2 was able to come back from a 1-3 deficit and win in Game 7, so now they're in the finals. Game 1 of the finals was a really close shootout, with G2 barely getting its 3rd goal, sending it into overtime on a buzzer beater. In overtime, G2 was able to get the goal and win Game 1, 4-3. Game 2 was another close shootout, but this time it was the Peeps getting the late game tying goal, scoring it with 21 seconds left. And the Peeps were the team able to close it out in overtime. The series score is now 1-1. Game 3 was another close one, but the Peeps looked to control it from the start. They scored the first goal and were able to score again any time G2 tied it up. The Peeps win 3-2. The series score is now 2-1. Game 4 was a lot more one-sided. The Peeps scored their first goal in 3 minutes, and 2 more in rapid succession after that. G2 really couldn't answer at all. The Peeps won 3-1. Making the series score 3-1, match point for the Peeps. Game 5 wasn't as one-sided, with G2 and the Peeps being tied 2-2 with 1 minute and 30 seconds left to go. G2 was able to pull away at the end, and the Peeps couldn't answer. G2 win 4-2. The series score is 3-2, still match point for the Peeps. Game 6 was a very close game, with G2 scoring the first goal, but the Peeps answering in less than a minute. The game goes to overtime, and G2 pulls it out in a 2-1 victory. The series is now tied 3-3. Going into Game 7, no one knew what to expect. The Peeps struck first, scoring just after halftime. That momentum never slows down, and the Peeps are able to win the Game 7 4-0. The Peeps win DreamHack Montreal. Thank you guys for watching. It really means a lot to me. I spent a very long time on this, easily the most out of any video I've ever made. Please tell me what you thought of it in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed.